It wasn't the rats that killed them, it was something far more human. You step into a medieval town in the summer of 1348. The air is thick with the acrid smell of smoke from burning pyres. Through the narrow, cobbled streets, the cries of the sick and dying echo, mixing with the muttered prayers of the fearful. You can see the fevered hands of children clutching at their mothers' skirts, the hollow eyes of men and women who have already glimpsed the shadow of death. The Black Death moves silently, invisible, yet everywhere. It rides on the backs of fleas and rats, hidden in bolts of silk and sacks of grain, carried by men who believe they're only trading spice and cloth. But what they really trade is despair. Whispers spread like wildfire, of divine punishment, of sins so black that heaven itself must respond. Neighbors accuse neighbors, priests burn incense and bodies alike, and the line between faith and madness begins to blur. In some ways, it's not a story so unlike our own. For fear itself, when it spreads, can infect faster than any plague, and isolation can rot the soul long before the body fades. But this story does not begin with death, it begins with the invisible agent that would shatter Europe. The plague did not announce itself with fanfare. It arrived on ships laden with goods and rats from the Black Sea, slipping quietly into ports like Genoa, Venice, and Marseille. Fleas carried the bacterium Yersinia pestis from rat to human, hopping unseen into homes, stables, and marketplaces. Merchants unaware of the invisible passengers in their cargo became unwilling agents of catastrophe. Communities could sense only that death had come, though they could not see it. Early warnings went unheeded, dismissed as exaggerations or rumors. Town councils had no framework for managing a plague that spared neither prince nor peasant. Chroniclers described merchants landing with their cargo and vanishing within days. Families were torn apart before they could understand what was happening. A single sailor arriving in Messina may have set the entire Sicilian coast aflame with death. Towns closed gates, but rats slipped through every crack. The disease's arrival was silent, yet absolute. Death travels silently, unseen, yet its arrival changes everything. The first signs were small, purple-black swellings, called buboes, appearing on the groin, armpits, and neck. Soon, fever consumed the body, vomiting racked the stomach, and convulsions wriggled through limbs like electric shocks. Skin blackened in horrifying patterns, a grim, visible reminder that death had claimed the body. Doctors were powerless. Bloodletting, poultices, prayers, and herbal concoctions were tried, yet they failed against an enemy they could not comprehend. Families watched in despair as their loved ones wasted away before their eyes. Clerics documented the horror in sermons and letters, describing the demon that strikes without cause and leaves no hope. People began to fear the very touch of others. Neighbors abandoned the sick. Children hid under beds, and parents left their homes to die alone in the streets. Each symptom seemed a mark of divine wrath, yet the reality was far simpler and more insidious, an invisible bacterium, riding the fleas of rats, bending the world toward grief. Bodies betray the invisible, leaving terror in their wake. Fear spreads faster than disease. In towns where plague struck first, rumors flourished. Jewish communities were blamed for poisoning wells. Innocent men and women were dragged from their homes, burned alive, or executed in grotesque public spectacles. Religious fanatics marched through streets, flagellating themselves, hoping to appease a god who seemed deaf to their cries. Families disowned relatives who showed signs of infection. Panic stripped humanity down to survival instinct, yet survival often took cruel turns. People hoarded food, barred doors, and abandoned the helpless, creating a psychological plague as virulent as the physical one. Art and literature would later capture this madness. The Danse Macabre emerged as a reminder that death touches everyone, rich or poor, young or old, sinner or saint. Yet in the moment, it was not symbolism, it was life itself, collapsing under fear. Fear can be as deadly as the plague itself. When terror spreads faster than the disease, humanity becomes its own enemy. The social structures that had held medieval Europe together, guilds, feudal obligations, communal labor, began to crumble. Farmers vanished, leaving fields unharvested. Bread became scarce, famine followed, and villages emptied. Kings and local lords struggled to respond, but their authority was powerless against an enemy that could not be seen or bargained with. Markets closed, trade slowed, and economies collapsed. Entire regions were left in ruin. Yet within this devastation, human resilience flickered. Some communities adapted, fleeing cities, closing doors, and maintaining rudimentary hygiene practices. The cultural response was profound. Artists painted skeletons dancing among the living. Writers crafted tales that forced humanity to confront mortality. Even in horror, creativity survived, documenting the collapse for centuries to come. Civilization bends under the weight of unseen destruction. The Black Death was not only a physical plague but a psychological one. Fear became a persistent, gnawing companion. Families obsessed over who might be infected, often abandoning their own kin in terror. Entire households locked themselves away, leaving loved ones to die alone in darkened rooms. In some towns, the wealthy commissioned physicians to create protective talismans, while the poor had nothing but superstition and prayer. Rituals for cleansing homes and burning possessions became extreme. Clothing and bedding of the sick were often burned, even if the family could not afford to replace them. Some people clung to the corpses of loved ones, unwilling to bury them, fearing contamination, or perhaps unable to let go. Others developed rituals of counting deaths and documenting names, trying in vain to impose order on chaos, as if writing could delay the inevitable. Chroniclers of the time described the madness in vivid terms: neighbors fleeing, children hiding, adults wandering the streets, screaming or muttering prayers to the dead. Entire villages descended into quiet hysteria. Those who survived carried the psychological scars for life: insomnia, nightmares, and a pervasive sense of guilt for having survived while so many perished. Death becomes a companion, haunting every corner of the mind, and sometimes it refuses to leave. The plague shattered society in ways that reverberated for generations. Agricultural production collapsed as peasants and laborers disappeared, leaving fields untended and granaries empty. Cities that had thrived on trade were left deserted, their markets silent, their streets littered with the dead. Economic systems crumbled, and with them, the social hierarchy that had defined Europe for centuries. Authorities struggled to maintain order, but laws and edicts were powerless against the disease that knew no rank. Local rulers tried quarantines, cordons, and isolation measures, yet the plague ignored borders. The Church, once the unchallenged moral and spiritual authority, faltered. Clerics themselves succumbed in large numbers, leaving communities without guidance, comfort, or explanation. Cultural responses were profound. Artists and writers captured the horror in grotesque imagery and allegorical tales. The danse macabre, the dance of death, became a visual representation of an inevitable, indiscriminate mortality that touched all, from kings to beggars. Even amidst chaos, human resilience flickered. Communities adapted rudimentary hygiene measures, fled cities, or constructed rudimentary hospitals. Survival required ingenuity, courage, and sometimes sheer luck. Civilization bends under the weight of invisible destruction, and yet life endures. Even as society collapses, the human spirit finds small ways to resist extinction. Though centuries separate us from the Black Death, its echoes are unmistakable. Modern pandemics, such as COVID-19, revealed similar patterns: fear spreading faster than disease, communities fractured by anxiety, and misinformation fueling panic. People hoarded resources, distrusted authorities, and turned on one another, just as in medieval Europe. Psychologists note that trauma from pandemics leaves long-lasting marks. The survivors of the Black Death exhibited what we now call survivor guilt, obsessive behaviors, and chronic anxiety. Entire populations learned early lessons about quarantine, hygiene, and disease management, but often only after immense suffering. The medieval plague also offers insight into leadership under crisis. Towns and kingdoms that acted decisively to isolate the sick fared better, while those that hesitated faced catastrophic mortality. Power, fear, and societal cohesion intersected in ways that resonate even today. Leaders must balance authority with compassion, knowledge with humanity, a lesson as relevant now as it was in the 14th century. Though centuries separate us, the shadow of fear is timeless, and its lessons remain. The Black Death is a mirror reflecting both human vulnerability and resilience. It reminds us that unseen forces, whether disease, fear, or obsession, can unmake lives and civilizations alike. The horror lies not only in mortality but in how grief, panic, and superstition twist human behavior. Friends abandoned neighbors, families deserted loved ones, and even the powerful felt helpless. Yet amidst devastation, human creativity and adaptation endured. Art, literature, and cultural memory preserve the experiences of those who suffered, offering future generations both warning and understanding. Smoke rose from countless pyres, and silence followed where life once flourished. Some ghosts do not rise, they linger in the air, in memory, in the stories we dare to tell. The plague teaches a subtle, haunting lesson: survival is not merely the avoidance of death, but the navigation of fear, grief, and moral choice. Power and knowledge matter little when humanity itself is frayed by terror. What do we fear more, the disease itself, or the way it changes the hearts of those it touches? History does not merely repeat, it whispers, warning us to see the invisible before it destroys everything we hold dear.